I was standing in my own living room when Margaret picked up the folder. She didn't ask. She didn't look at me. She just opened it, flipped through the pages, and nodded slightly, like she had confirmed a number she already knew. Nathan sat beside her, enraged, not confused, not surprised. Calm. That was the moment I realized I was no longer part of the conversation. I was the subject of it. My name is Elena Wright. I'm 31 years old. And 3 weeks before my wedding, I understood that the people I was about to marry into had already decided my role without me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't leave. I just stood there, frozen, feeling something inside me quietly collapse. I didn't know it then, but that silence was the first crack in everything I thought was solid. Before I go any further, I want to pause here for a second. If you're listening to this while driving, cooking, or lying awake at night, tell me where you're listening from. I read those comments more than you think. And if you've ever had that feeling of being slowly pushed out of your own place in a family, where nothing loud happens but everything still hurts, you're not alone. Stay with me. What comes next explains how that silence was built, piece by piece. I used to believe silence was safety. When I was 9, our apartment always smelled like reheated coffee and laundry detergent. My parents left before sunrise, the kind of people who spoke in clipped sentences because every minute had a price tag. I would sit at the kitchen table with my homework spread out, listening to the radiator click and the neighbor's TV bleeding through the wall. My grandmother, Rosemary Wright, would shuffle in wearing thick socks and a faded robe, her hands already dusted with flour. She didn't fill the room with chatter. She filled it with small, steady sounds, a spoon against a bowl, a kettle beginning to hiss, the soft scrape of a chair as she pulled it close. She'd glance at my workbook, then at my face, and say, "Your eyes tell on you. Baby, don't hide from yourself." My mom called at noon sometimes, breathless between meetings. "Is Ethan eating?" she'd ask. She never meant to sound cruel, but the question always landed like a door shutting. When my dad called, he asked about bills, not feelings. I learned early what got attention: numbers. Receipts? Proof. One Thanksgiving, the air inside our place was thick with onion and turkey grease. Ethan ran in circles, laughing, and my mom laughed with him. When I carried the cranberry sauce, it slipped and splashed my sleeve. My mom's smile disappeared. "Elena." "Seriously?" she snapped, then turned right back to Ethan, smoothing his hair like nothing had happened. I swallowed it like it was nothing. 2. Later, when the sink was full of warm, greasy water, Rosemary handed me a towel and said, "They love you, but they're tired. Don't let their tiredness become your story." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, like she was warning me about weather before a storm. The day my parents died, the world didn't shatter the way movies promise. It narrowed. It became paperwork and phone calls and a funeral home that smelled like lilies and cold metal. I remember the weight of my father's watch in my palm because someone said I should keep it. I remember Ethan slipping out of my hand, already running toward somebody else. After the funeral, a lawyer with tired eyes sat at Rosemary's dining table and slid documents across the polished wood. The condo in Midtown my parents had just finished paying off would be mine when I turned 25. Rosemary's fingers trembled as she signed, and I watched the pen move like it was cutting a new life into existence. The condo wasn't just property. It was the last solid thing they left behind. I didn't know it then, but I would protect it like a body protects a wound. That night, standing in Rosemary's narrow hallway with coats still hanging like ghosts, I promised myself no one would ever control my life again. I would earn my own safety. I would build walls that didn't need anyone's permission. That promise made me strong in ways people praised. It also made me lonely in ways no one saw. In college, I worked nights and studied days. The fluorescent lights, the stale break room coffee, the ache in my calves when I finally sat down. I sent money to Rosemary when I could. I sent some to Ethan too, because taking care of people felt like the closest thing to love I trusted. When I finally moved into the condo, The first night alone felt like standing inside a new lung. The air was clean. The floors were quiet. I ran my fingers along the door frames, noticing tiny chips my parents had never fixed. I kept those flaws. They made the place feel honest. I didn't know it then, but that honesty would be exactly what certain people wanted to steal. By 31, I was a senior financial auditor for a logistics corporation big enough to swallow smaller companies without making the news. My days were spreadsheets and deadlines. I was good at it because numbers never pretended to be anything else. If a line item didn't match, it didn't match. I met Nathan Cole in a bank lobby on a Tuesday that smelled like wet coats. The rain wasn't pouring, it just hung in the air and made everything look tired. I was there to notarize paperwork when I noticed him at the counter. Voice low, frustration leaking through his polite smile. He looked up when the teller asked if anyone understood asset verification and holding structures. I shouldn't have gotten involved. I was off the clock. I can take a quick look, I said. Nathan turned to me with relief that looked like gratitude. He was tall, well-groomed, the kind of man who made clean clothes look effortless. His cologne was subtle, cedar, and something sharp. I reviewed his documents, pointed out a missing attachment, and watched his shoulders loosen as if I'd removed a weight. "You're different," he said as we walked out. The rain tapping the glass doors behind us. "Most people don't help unless they want something." He asked if he could buy me coffee as thanks. The coffee shop was warm and smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon. Nathan talked about his transportation business, how he started from nothing, how he had plans. He listened like my words mattered, and that attention hit a place in me that had been cold for years. When he walked me to my car, he didn't touch me. He just said, "I'd like to see you again. Elena." No games. His tone made my chest tighten. Not with fear, with hope. I didn't notice then how quickly he asked what part of town I lived in, how smoothly he slid in questions about whether I rented or owned. I answered without thinking, because it didn't feel like a test. It felt like interest. 2 weeks later, he showed up at my condo with a grocery bag and an easy smile, like he belonged on my doorstep. He noticed the framed photo of my parents in the hallway and paused, just long enough to look sincere. "You've been through a lot," he said, voice soft. Then his eyes drifted, not to the picture, but to the hardwood floors, the clean lines, the view of the city. "This place is yours," he asked. "Casual." I said yes. "Inherited." He nodded slowly, like he was filing the information away. That same night, he offered to fix my leaky faucet. The wrench scraped metal. Water ticked into the sink, and he hummed under his breath like a man building comfort. When the drip stopped, he kissed my forehead and said, "I like women who have their life together. It's rare." I should have heard the warning hidden inside the praise. Instead, I felt chosen, and that feeling covered every small doubt like fresh paint. I didn't know it then, but he was learning the map of my life, room by room. Looking back, that was the first time I handed him something that wasn't his. By the third date, Nathan made my routines feel like they were meant to include him. He learned my coffee order, remembered I hated cilantro, and texted "good morning" at the exact minute my alarm went off, like he'd synced himself to my life. When I worked late, he left takeout on my counter with a note, "Eat. Don't make me worry." It felt protective. It also felt like ownership dressed up as care. One Friday, he took me to a charity gala at a downtown hotel. I wore a plain black dress, hair pulled back so tight my scalp ached. The ballroom glowed with warm light and expensive perfume. Nathan moved like he belonged there, shaking hands, laughing, introducing me as if he was proud of me. "This is Elena," he told a man with silver hair. "She keeps billion-dollar companies honest." Later, in the elevator to the parking deck, he leaned close and said, "I like that you don't need me." Then, softer, "But I want to be needed anyway." I laughed, because it sounded romantic, because I wanted it to be. I didn't realize he was practicing a future where my independence would be treated like a problem to solve. The proposal came fast, 3 months in, he took me to a restaurant with dim jazz and candles. The ring arrived balanced on a champagne flute. Strangers clapped. "Marry me." "Elena," he said. "Let's build something real." I said yes before my brain could run the numbers. On the drive home, the city lights smeared across the windshield. And I told myself it was fine. The next morning, the ring felt heavier than gold. Something quieter sat under my ribs. Like my body had signed a warning my mouth hadn't read. I shoved the feeling down and opened my laptop to plan. Deposits. Timelines. Guest lists. I treated it like a project because projects were safer than feelings. I didn't know it then. But I was building a stage for people who had already cast me. Nathan's mother wanted to meet me 2 weeks after the engagement. "She's old school," he warned as we drove. "She can be intense." The neighborhood was tidy. Margaret's porch was swept clean. No clutter. She opened the door wearing a crisp sweater and pearl studs. Her hair was pinned into a neat twist, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Elena," she said, like she was tasting the name, inside. The air smelled like lemon cleaner with something stale underneath. She guided us to the dining table where a teapot waited. Warm. Margaret's questions sounded polite, but they landed like an interview. "What do you do exactly? How long have you been with the company? Any student loans?" she asked them with a calm tone that made refusing feel rude. Nathan sat beside me, hand on my knee, inattention to silent. When I mentioned my condo, her gaze sharpened. "In your name?" she asked. I nodded. Inherited another nod. She smiled then. "Small and private. That's wonderful," she said. But it didn't sound like congratulations. It sounded like confirmation. In the kitchen, while she refilled tea, I heard her say, almost casually, "Stability matters." Nathan answered in a low voice I couldn't catch. And then they both went quiet when I stepped closer. That hush followed me back to the table like a shadow. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself families were strange. I didn't know it then. But that hush would return in sharper forms. After that dinner, Margaret started texting me directly. Not warm messages. Reminders. "Did you book the venue? Make sure the contract is in your name?" "Sweetheart." She called me sweetheart the way a banker calls you, ma'am. When I didn't reply quickly, she'd send a second message. It wasn't loud. It was constant. Nathan's stories about his business grew bigger as the wedding got closer. New clients. Expansion. Opportunities he swore were finally landing. Sometimes he stepped into my hallway to take calls, voice dropping, turning his back. When I asked questions, he kissed my forehead and said, "Don't stress. I've got it." He made it sound like love. It also made it sound like I had no right to understand what I was marrying into. There were nights he fell asleep on my couch, phone face down on his chest. I'd watch the screen flicker with notifications that vanished the second they lit up. Once I reached for a blanket and he woke instantly, snatching the phone like it burned. "Sorry," he said, smiling too quick. "Business stuff." I nodded, even though my stomach tightened. I hated that my body noticed things my mind refused to name. A week later, Margaret invited us over again to talk reception details. She insisted we come early because she had documents to review. The word documents made my auditor brain perk up. It also made me uneasy, because wedding planning didn't require secrecy. When I asked Nathan why his mother cared so much about paperwork, he shrugged. "She likes to be involved," he said. "She's excited." His smile didn't match his eyes. The night before that meeting, I stayed late at work. The office dim except for my monitor's glow. My cursor blinked on a blank cell, steady as a pulse, while my mind replayed Margaret's questions. "In your name, stability matters." I thought of my parents' condo, of Rosemary's hands shaking as she signed those papers. I thought of Nathan's praise, how often it circled back to what I had, not who I was. It felt like being admired through glass. Driving home, sleet tapped the windshield like fingernails. The condo was quiet, heavier than usual, like it was waiting. I warmed leftover soup, but the smell turned my stomach. I twisted the ring off and set it on the nightstand just to breathe. That's when I dreamed of Rosemary. She was sitting at her old dining table, the lamp casting a yellow pool of light over her hands. She wore the same knitted cardigan she used to wrap around her shoulders, but her eyes were sharp. "In 9, Elena," she said, "you're about to marry into a family that speaks in silence." I tried to answer, but my throat wouldn't work. Rosemary leaned forward. "They don't want your love," she whispered. "They want what you can sign away." Her voice cracked like it hurt her to say it. "Go there early. Go alone. Look with your own eyes." I woke with my heart pounding. The clock read 4:12 a.m. Winter pressed against the windows. I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the drip of the faucet Nathan had fixed. There was no drip, just silence. And in that silence, I understood one thing with terrifying clarity. If I didn't go, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what I refused to see. I drove to Margaret Cole's house before sunrise. The way you drive when you're trying not to wake the part of you that's already panicking. Frost filmed the lawns. I parked 2 houses down and walked the rest, my breath coming out in small, white bursts. When I rang the bell, no one answered. I rang again. Behind the house, a door snapped open. A young woman slipped out, blonde hair under a knit cap, a red jacket half-zipped. She moved like someone escaping. She jumped into a compact sedan and pulled away without looking back. My skin went cold in a way the weather couldn't explain. Margaret opened the front door with a practiced smile. "Elena, what a surprise. Nathan said you'd come this afternoon." Her eyes flicked to the street behind me. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled like old coffee and lemon polish. Everything was lined up, centered, controlled. Margaret led me to the dining table. A thin folder sat open, papers spread like an autopsy. "Venue contracts," she said lightly. While she stepped into the kitchen, I glanced down. The title wasn't a venue name. It read, "Independent Female Property Owners." Underneath were names, addresses, notes in tight handwriting. Sole title, "No spouse. Limited family nearby." My stomach dropped. Margaret returned with chamomile tea and slid the cup toward me. "Calming," she said. "You look pale, nervous about marrying my son." "I'm fine," I lead. She studied me the way a lender studies a credit report. "Marriage is about balance," she said. "Some people bring feelings. Some people bring stability. Nathan needs stability." I asked about the blonde woman. Margaret's smile thinned. "Neighborhood girl," she said. "Don't be dramatic." Then she went to a cabinet and dropped a photo album onto the table with a thud. I flipped through baby pictures, school portraits, Nathan at Christmas. Then the pages shifted into recent years, and my throat tightened. Nathan, older, arm around that same blonde woman. One photo showed them in front of a house I didn't recognize. Her hand lifted to show a ring. Another showed white lace, a courthouse backdrop, a cheap bouquet, a wedding. When I looked up, Margaret's eyes were flat. "It was a mistake," she said. "A phase. She was unstable. It ended. But you didn't think I deserved to know he was married." Margaret leaned in, voice low and sharp. "You deserve what you earn, Elena. Don't confuse honesty with entitlement." I left without touching the tea. My hands shook on the steering wheel all the way home. The condo felt smaller, like the walls had crept in. I kept seeing that folder, the way it described women like inventory. That night, Nathan came over with takeout and wine, smiling like he'd walked into a normal life. "Hey, beautiful." I set the album on the coffee table between us. "Why didn't you tell me you were married?" His smile froze. He sat down slowly. "My mom showed you that. So it's true. It was complicated," he said. "It lasted months. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me." I said, "Were you going to tell me after the wedding or never?" He exhaled, irritation slipping through. "Elena, don't do this. I saw a list at your mother's house." I said, "Women, addresses, notes about property." "What is that?" His eyes darkened. "You were snooping." It was open. He leaned forward, jaw tight. "You have no right to dig into things you don't understand. In our wedding planning," I asked, "or in your business of finding women like me?" The warmth drained out of his face. "Not everyone has a clean past," he said, "and you're not perfect either. You're alone, Elena. No one's watching your back. That's why you're so jumpy." The words hit the oldest place in me, the place that still smelled like funeral lilies. I stood up, knees weak. "Get out." Nathan rose too, slow and controlled. He picked up his jacket and looked at me like I'd disappointed him. "Fine," he said. "Cancel if you want. But don't pretend you're safe just because you own a door that locks." He left, the door slamming so hard the frames rattled. I didn't cry. I just stared at the deadbolt, listening to the condo settle back into silence, and realized I had been living inside someone else's plan. The next morning I went to the garage early, hoping the cold air would reset my brain. The concrete smelled damp, and someone's car alarm chirped once and died. Under my windshield wiper was a white envelope, folded, clean. No stamp, no return address. My fingers went numb as I opened it. Inside was one sheet of printer paper, the letters thick and black, as if pressed down with anger. "You're playing with fire. It burns bright but kills slow." I spun in place, searching for a face, a shadow, any witness. No one. Just the elevator dinging above me and my own heartbeat, loud and helpless. I folded it, tucked it away, and suddenly my home felt like a spotlight. I didn't call Nathan. I didn't call Margaret. I called Talia Brooks, the one person who could hear a threat and turn it into a plan. She answered on the second ring. "Say it clean," she said. "What happened?" I read the note out loud, and my throat tightened on the last word. Talia didn't soothe me. "Don't touch anything else," she said. "Go back upstairs. Lock your door. I'm coming." She arrived with her hair twisted up and a legal pad in her hand, smelling like peppermint gum and winter air. She photographed the envelope in the paper. "This isn't a prank," she murmured. "They want your body to learn fear." By noon, I had called Evan Holt. Talia knew him from a case years ago, back when he wore a badge. Now he worked out of a cramped office above a tire shop downtown, and he spoke like a man who never wasted words. "If he's leaving paper on your car, he's testing proximity," Evan said. "He's asking how close he can get without consequences." He came that evening and walked my condo the way I walk a ledger, slow and exact. He installed a door camera, one in the hallway, and a small panic device that fit in my palm like a coin. "Press it and I get an alert," he said. "But don't rely on tools. Change your patterns." Predictable. The word tasted bitter. My whole life had been built on predictability because chaos had taken my parents. And now predictability was a trail someone else could follow. That night, Talia slept on my couch, boots by the door, her phone charging on the coffee table. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, hearing every building sound, every distant elevator cable. Around 240 a.m. My phone buzzed. "Unknown number." I answered with my thumb shaking. A voice came through, filtered and low. "Elena Wright." My blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" Silence. Then a soft laugh. "You're making trouble." "I'm not afraid of you." I lead, because fear was already climbing my throat. "You should be," the voice said. "That condo is the only thing you have left. Keep pushing, and you'll lose it." The line went dead. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, hearing nothing but my own breath. In the living room, Talia sat up. "You heard," I whispered. She nodded once. "Now it's direct," she said. "Now it's usable." I wanted to call my mom, then remembered there was no number to dial. The absence hit hard. I had built my life to be unreplaceable, and in 1 week I was being treated like a line item. Easy to erase. 2 days later, I came home from the grocery store to find my front door slightly open. Not broken, not forced, just unlatched, as if someone had been inside and wanted me to know it. The hallway smelled faintly of cedar cologne. My knees went weak. I didn't step in. I backed away and called Evan. "Stay where you are," he said. "Call 911. I'm on my way." The police arrived first. They walked through my condo while I stood in the hallway clutching my keys. Nothing was stolen, but the cabinet where I kept my deed paperwork was torn apart. Folders tossed like trash. On my bed, centered on the comforter, sat one sheet of paper. "You think you won." The letters looked slow, deliberate, like someone enjoying the stroke of each line. I felt my stomach fold in on itself. They weren't trying to rob me. They were trying to make me doubt my own ground. That night we watched the hallway footage. At M. A man in a baseball cap stood outside my door for over a minute. He didn't knock. He didn't move. He just faced the peephole like a statue. Even with the grainy video, I recognized the posture, the slight tilt of the shoulders. "Nathan." The next afternoon, the intercom buzzed. On the screen, a woman stood in the lobby, tall and polished, coat belted tight, lipstick too precise. She looked into the camera like she was looking through me. "Elena," she said, "we need to talk." I didn't open the door. I watched her smile widen, cold and patient. "This doesn't have to get messy," she said. "You can stop. And this all goes away." My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" Her laugh was small. "Victoria Lane," she said. "Family. And you're walking a very thin line." When she left, my hands shook. Talia steadied me with one hand on my shoulder. "They're surrounding you," she said. Not with force, with inevitability. I stared at my front door, at the lock Evan had installed, at the condo that had once felt like a lung. "Then I can't keep playing defense," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone older. It happened in the hallway outside my condo door just after 2:15 a.m. When the building was asleep and the only light came from the exit sign and the thin blue glow of my security monitor, the camera pinged. A sharp chirp that sliced the quiet. I sat up so fast the sheets twisted around my legs. The air smelled faintly like dust and heater vents. I crossed the floor barefoot, cold tile biting my soles, and stared at the screen. A shape slid into frame. Dark hoodie, baseball cap low. He paused close enough that the camera caught the wet shine on his jacket, like he'd stood in rain. He lifted his head a fraction and the angle of his jaw hit me with a memory I didn't want. "Nathan." I tasted metal in my mouth. Behind me, a soft rustle. Talia was already awake, hair wild, eyes clear. She stepped beside me and whispered, "Don't move." Nathan didn't knock. He didn't ring. He crouched at my smart lock with a thin tool that flashed when it caught the hallway light. His hands worked with calm, practiced patience, like he'd done it 100 times. The lock's indicator blinked. Once, twice. I opened the drawer under the monitor and wrapped my fingers around the panic device Evan gave me. It was smooth plastic with one button. So small it felt insulting compared to the fear swelling in my chest. Talia leaned in. "Let him commit," she murmured. "Let the camera see it." On the screen, Nathan glanced down the hallway, then back to the lock. The casual ownership in his posture made my stomach turn. I remembered him standing in my kitchen, tightening a faucet, humming, acting like my home was his project. I remembered the warmth I'd mistaken for safety. The lock gave a quiet click. My breath caught. The deadbolt didn't slide yet, but the first barrier was gone. Nathan's hand moved to the handle and turned it slowly. The door shifted inward a fraction, just enough to announce that it could. I pressed the button. No sound. No flashing light. Just a tiny vibration in my palm, like it swallowed my panic and sent it through the walls. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Nathan froze with his hand on the knob, listening. Then he spoke, low and intimate, aimed at the wood. "Elena." I clamped my mouth shut. My heartbeat felt loud enough to give me away. "Open up," he said. "Let's talk." Talia shook her head hard. A silent command. Nathan laughed under his breath. You know I can get in whenever I want. Right, his voice softened in that fake tenderness I used to fall for. You made me do this. The words landed in the oldest part of me. The same script. The same blame. The same way he turned my boundaries into his excuse. He tried the handle again. Harder. The frame creaked. A small complaint from the bones of my home. My hands clenched so tight my nails cut my skin. Talia lifted her phone and dialed the direct line Evan set up. He's here, she said. Steady. He's at her door. Nathan pulled a thicker tool from his pocket and jammed it near the lock. Metal scraped. The camera caught the glint. My stomach turned. That condo was my parents' last gift. The one thing that proved I wasn't helpless. Now he was treating it like a suggestion. Then the elevator dinged down the hall. Nathan stiffened. He looked over his shoulder. A voice echoed. Male and calm. Step away from the door. Nathan stayed crouched, like a predator refusing to abandon a kill. Now, the voice repeated, louder. 2 uniformed officers entered the frame, then 2 more behind them. Their flashlights painted bright circles on the walls. The hallway suddenly looked stripped and small, like a stage with the curtains ripped away. Nathan stood slowly, hands visible, not raised. He turned just enough that the camera caught part of his face. His eyes were not the warm brown softness he'd sold me. They were flat, angry at being interrupted. What's this? He asked, almost amused. I'm visiting my fiancé. One officer stepped closer. We received a call. Sir, do you live here? Nathan's lips twitched. I used to, he said, like it was a joke. The officer's stance changed. Turn around. For a heartbeat. Nathan looked like he might comply. He lifted his hands in a performative surrender. Then his gaze flicked toward the stairwell. Quick and calculating, he ran. The camera caught a blur. Then the officers moving. Boots pounding, radios crackling. For a second, the screen showed an empty hallway and the swinging shadow of the exit sign. Then Nathan stumbled back into view, tackled hard against the wall. One officer pinned his arms while another snapped cuffs around his wrists. Nathan twisted, face contorted. And what came out of him wasn't a plea. It was rage. Elena! He screamed, as if my name was the charge. You think you're winning? Talia's fingers dug into my wrist, holding me back from the peephole. I could smell her peppermint gum, sharp against the stale hallway air. One officer spoke into his radio. Voice clipped, while another checked Nathan's pockets and pulled out the metal tools like ugly trophies. Nathan kept thrashing until a cuff chain clinked and his body stilled. In that pause, I felt my knees start to shake. I covered my mouth with my hand, not to hide tears, to keep myself from making any sound at all. They hauled him toward the elevator. Nathan kept staring at my door like he could see through it, like he could drag me out with his eyes. As he passed the camera, he slowed, just enough to look straight into the lens, and he smiled. It wasn't the smile he used on strangers. It was thin, cold, and certain, like a promise made in the dark. The silence after the hallway emptied felt heavier than the noise had been. It pressed into my ears, into my chest, until I realized I was shaking, not from fear anymore. From the sudden absence of it, Talia made me sit. She poured water I didn't drink. The condo smelled wrong, like something had been disturbed and hadn't settled back yet. I stared at the front door, at the shallow scrape near the lock where Nathan's tool had bitten into metal. Proof leaves marks. So does trust. Evan arrived before dawn. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked what I wanted to do next. I handed him the folder I'd been building for days. Bank statements, patterned transfers, shell companies that led nowhere until you traced them long enough to see the same name blinking at you from different angles. Nathan's angles. Margaret's silence. Victoria's commissions. Evan nodded once. This is enough to open doors, he said, not close them. That afternoon, I met Naomi Pierce at a cafe that smelled like burnt toast and old wood. She sat stiffly, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. When she spoke, her voice stayed level, like she'd already cried all her tears somewhere else. He told me I was special, she said. Then he told me to sell. She slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were copies of texts, a deed transfer, a promise written like a vow and broken like a habit. I felt heat crawl up my neck when I saw my own story mirrored in her sentences. Then Caleb climbed onto the chair beside her. He was small, knees knocking the table, eyes too serious for 6. He swung his legs and hummed, unaware of the weight of the room. When he smiled at me, something in my chest cracked, clean, open. It was like seeing myself at 9, waiting quietly for adults to finish deciding things. Naomi swallowed. Nathan tried to adopt him, she said. Said it would make us a family. Then he disappeared when I wouldn't sign. Caleb looked up. He said he'd come back. He added, matter of fact. The words hit deeper than any threat. Not because of cruelty, because of precision. That was the wound he used. Promise, then absence. Care, then control. I drove home in a fog, replaying Rosemary's warning. Families that speak in silence. I understood now that silence wasn't empty. It was strategic, Margaret called that night. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. We need to talk, she said. This has gone too far. It went too far before me. I replied. She paused. I could hear the house behind her. The same, careful, quiet. If I tell you what I know, she said slowly, you'll destroy my son. I closed my eyes. You already helped him do that, I said. To other people, the line stayed open. No apology, just breathing. When she spoke again, it was different. I kept copies. She said, I thought I was being careful. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. That night, I placed the panic device back in the drawer and locked the door. Not because I was safe, because I was ready. Ready to stop reacting. Ready to choose where the light would fall. Some endings announce themselves. Others wait until you decide to stop calling them beginnings. By the time you're hearing this, my door is closed. The lock steady. The night quieter than it's been in weeks. I don't know how everything ends yet. I only know that silence no longer owns me. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, subscribe. This story isn't over. Stay with me if you understand what it's like to realize too late that love was conditional, that safety had fine print, that loyalty was demanded but never returned. Share where you're listening from, or what part of this stayed with you. Sometimes saying it out loud is how the weight finally shifts. I'll keep telling this story, not because it's finished, but because walking away in the dark isn't the same as being free, and if you're still here, listening, then neither of us is alone anymore. That knowledge is what carries me forward tonight quietly.